There's a quiet preference many people carry but rarely say out loud. It's not that you hate people. It's not that you're antisocial, broken, or bad at life. You just feel better when the world goes quiet. While others light up at packed rooms, loud laughter, and full calendars, something in you softens when plans get cancelled, when the door closes, when the noise fades, when you're finally home. And you've probably wondered, what does that say about me? Because from the outside, loving home can look like avoidance, like laziness, like you're missing out. But inside, it feels like relief, like your shoulders drop an inch without you asking them to, like your breathing deepens for the first time all day. This isn't about being shy. It isn't about being introverted in the way social media defines it. And it definitely isn't about a lack of ambition or curiosity about life. It's about safety. There's a part of you that relaxes when stimulation lowers, when nothing is demanded of you, when you don't have to perform, respond. At home, you don't disappear, you finally return to yourself. But here's the question most people never stop to ask. Why does quiet feel so necessary? And why, for some people, does home feel less like a preference and more like a refuge? That's where the real story begins. For many people, loving home isn't a personality trait. It isn't a lifestyle choice, and it isn't something they consciously decided. It's something their nervous system chose for them. After long periods of pressure, emotional, social, or psychological, the body learns patterns long before the mind does. When life feels unpredictable, demanding, or unsafe, your system shifts into survival mode. At first, that might look like pushing harder, staying busy, staying strong, but eventually, something changes. The body gets tired of being on, and when fight or flight no longer feels sustainable, the nervous system finds another strategy: withdrawal. Not as avoidance, but as regulation. Home becomes the place where your system can finally exhale. The lighting is familiar. The sounds are predictable. No one is watching. No one needs anything from you. Your shoulders soften. Your thoughts slow. Your heart rate settles. This isn't comfort-seeking, it's stabilization. In a culture that glorifies constant motion, productivity, and visibility, this response often gets misunderstood. From the outside, it can look like retreat, like disengagement, like giving up. But on the inside, something very intelligent is happening. Your nervous system is conserving energy. It's lowering threat. It's trying to bring you back to baseline after too much noise for too long. That's why being home can feel restorative in a way nothing else does. Not because the world is bad, but because your system has learned that quiet equals safety. And once the body learns that lesson, it doesn't forget it easily. Some people don't retreat into their homes because they prefer quiet. They do it because life slowly taught them that being out there costs too much. This archetype isn't formed by one dramatic event. It's shaped by accumulation. Long days where you had to hold it together. Workplaces where pressure never eased. Relationships where you were always adapting, explaining, absorbing more than you received. Little by little, the world stopped feeling neutral and started feeling heavy. There's often a specific moment, though most people don't name it at the time. A night you come home and realize you're not just tired, you're depleted. Not in a sleep it off way, but in a deeper sense. Your body feels hollow. Your mind can't organize another conversation, and the thought of showing up again tomorrow feels unbearable. So you start choosing home more often. At first, it's practical. Rest, recovery, time to think. But soon, home becomes something else. It becomes the only place where you don't feel braced for impact, where you're not anticipating criticism, conflict, or emotional labor. This isn't laziness. It's not withdrawal for comfort's sake. It's a system that learned through experience that constant exposure leads to collapse. What many people miss is that these individuals often like people. They may even enjoy social connection when their system has the capacity for it. But capacity matters, and when it's been drained too many times without repair, the body starts choosing safety over stimulation by default. Home, then, becomes a temporary shelter, a place to heal, regroup, and feel whole again. The danger isn't in seeking that refuge. The danger is when no one ever names what pushed you there in the first place. Because without understanding the cause, retreat can quietly turn into a life lived in self-protection long after the threat has passed. Introversion is one of the most misunderstood labels in modern psychology. It gets flattened into stereotypes: shy, quiet, socially awkward, bad at small talk. But for true introverts, none of that is the core issue. The real experience of introversion isn't about fear of people. It's about energy. For a true introvert, social interaction, especially unstructured, high-stimulus interaction, draws from a limited internal reserve. They might enjoy the conversation. They might be fully engaged, warm, present, but underneath that engagement, something is being spent. And the cost doesn't always show up in the moment. It shows up later. When the social energy drops and the body catches up, there's a familiar after effect: mental fog, physical heaviness, an urge to be silent, not sadness, not anxiety, just depletion, the kind that can't be fixed by scrolling or distraction, only by space. This is why home matters so much, not as an escape, but as a reset point, a place where stimulation lowers enough for the nervous system to recharge, where there's no pressure to respond, perform, or keep up, where the inner battery quietly rebuilds itself. What's important to understand is that introverts don't dislike people. Many care deeply. They simply learned, often through burnout, that without sufficient solitude, they lose access to themselves. Their thoughts blur, their patience thins, their sense of center disappears. So choosing home isn't avoidance. It's maintenance. It's self-regulation. The myth is that introverts are closed off from life. The truth is, they stay close to life by stepping away from it just enough to remain intact. For creators, home often becomes more than a place to rest. It becomes a space of focus, a container, a quiet inner workshop where ideas finally have room to breathe. Writers, artists, musicians, thinkers, many of them discover early on that their best work doesn't arrive in crowded rooms or constant conversation. It shows up in stillness, in long stretches of uninterrupted time, in the absence of external demands. Solitude gives their minds the depth and continuity needed to connect distant thoughts, emotions, and images into something meaningful. In that sense, loving home is not about withdrawing from the world. It's about going inward long enough to bring something back. But solitude is a double-edged gift. The same quiet that allows ideas to surface can also amplify doubt. Without external reference points, the inner critic grows louder. Thoughts loop. Perfectionism creeps in. And what started as creative focus can slowly tilt into isolation, where ideas stay trapped in the mind instead of moving into form. Many creators know this tension intimately. Home can feel like a sanctuary one day and a sealed room the next. Inspiration flows, then stalls. Confidence rises, then collapses under its own weight. Without some friction from the outside world, creativity can lose direction, momentum, and grounding. This is where the myth breaks. Solitude doesn't automatically produce great work. It produces raw material. Depth without movement can turn heavy. Insight without expression can turn inward and sour. Healthy, creative solitude has a rhythm. Inward to gather, outward to test, share, and shape. Home provides the depth, but the world provides the feedback that keeps creation alive. For creators, learning this balance isn't about forcing social energy. It's about recognizing that solitude is a powerful tool, but only when it remains a doorway, not a destination. For some people, the reason they prefer staying home has very little to do with social connection and everything to do with sensation. They don't dislike people. They aren't afraid of interaction. What drains them is the environment itself, the volume, the lights, the constant movement, the feeling of being surrounded by too much input at once. Crowded spaces aren't just busy to them, they're overwhelming. Conversations overlap, music blares, phones buzz, visuals compete for attention. Their nervous system doesn't filter this stimulation easily, so everything arrives at full intensity. Nothing fades into the background. This is sensory overload, and when it happens, the body responds the same way it would to any other form of stress. Muscles tense, breathing shortens, irritation rises. Fatigue sets in quickly, not because something is wrong, but because the system is working overtime just to stay regulated. Home, in contrast, offers control, predictable sounds, softer lighting, familiar textures, the ability to lower stimulation instead of constantly adapting to it. In that environment, the nervous system doesn't have to fight for balance. It can simply settle. This is why it's important to separate social preference from sensory tolerance. A person can enjoy meaningful conversation and still avoid noisy restaurants. They can care deeply about connection and still need quiet to feel okay. When this distinction isn't understood, people often shame themselves. They assume they're too sensitive or difficult. But sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's a nervous system wired to notice more. And for those systems, choosing home isn't avoidance. It's intelligent self-protection. There's a transition almost no one talks about. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no dramatic breaking point. No clear moment where peace suddenly becomes a problem. It happens quietly. At first, being home feels restorative. You cancel plans and feel relief. Your body softens. Your mind clears. Silence does what it's always done, it heals. But over time, something subtle shifts. You stop looking forward to going out not because you're tired, but because the idea no longer sparks anything. Invitations feel heavy before they even arrive. The world begins to feel distant, as if it's happening somewhere you no longer belong. This is the moment when rest turns into retreat. The comfort that once gave you space to recover slowly starts narrowing your range of motion. You're safe but contained, quiet but disconnected. Not unhappy, exactly, but strangely unmotivated. And in that stillness, the mind fills the gaps. Thoughts loop, doubts grow louder, overthinking replaces presence. Without small doses of external movement, the nervous system loses contrast. Days blur together, time stretches without markers. What makes this transition dangerous is how reasonable it feels. There's no obvious harm, no crisis to point to, just a gradual shrinking of life that's easy to justify as self-care. But peace was never meant to eliminate movement. It was meant to restore it. When solitude stops leading back to life, when it no longer opens outward, it quietly crosses into isolation. And by the time many people notice, they don't feel trapped. They just feel stuck. Understanding this transition is crucial. Not to shame yourself, but to recognize when what once protected you is asking to be rebalanced. What often makes isolation harder isn't the solitude itself. It's the shame that quietly wraps around it. At some point, a thought starts forming in the background. Something is wrong with me. You watch others moving forward, building careers, relationships, full lives, and you begin measuring yourself against an invisible timeline you never agreed to. The comparison isn't loud. It's subtle, but it's constant. I should want more. I should be out there. I shouldn't feel this behind. This shame layer is especially heavy because it feels personal. You don't see it as a nervous system response or a protective pattern. You see it as a flaw, a lack of drive, a failure to keep up with life the way everyone else seems to. And shame is isolating by design. The more you judge yourself, the more you withdraw. The more you withdraw, the quieter your world becomes. And in that quiet, shame grows louder. It tells you that you've missed your chance, that you don't know how to re-enter, that staying home is proof you're stuck. But this loop didn't begin with weakness. It began with adaptation. At some point, your system learned that pulling back reduced pain, that staying small preserved energy, that quiet felt safer than disappointment or overload. Shame enters later when the strategy outlives the threat and turns inward. Nothing about this means you're broken. It means your system did what it was designed to do. Healing doesn't start by forcing confidence or motivation. It starts by removing blame, by understanding that what you're feeling isn't a personal failure, it's a pattern that once kept you intact. And patterns, once seen clearly, can be gently changed. When people finally realize they've been isolating, the advice they hear is almost always the same. Get out more. Be social. Push yourself. But that approach misses the point and often makes things worse. The answer isn't to swing to the opposite extreme. Balance doesn't mean forcing yourself into overstimulation or pretending to be someone you're not. It means learning how to move between solitude and connection without abandoning your nervous system in the process. Healthy balance is small and intentional. It's choosing environments that feel safe enough, not overwhelming. A quiet walk instead of a crowded event. One honest conversation instead of 10 shallow ones. Sunlight, movement, and presence without pressure. For many people, the goal isn't being social. It's reintroducing gentle contact with life. Letting the body remember that the outside world doesn't always demand more than it gives, that not every interaction requires performance or endurance. Home remains important in this balance. It's where you rest, reflect, and reset, but it stops being the only place you feel okay. It becomes a base, not a boundary. What most people get wrong is thinking growth has to feel uncomfortable to be real. In truth, sustainable growth often feels subtle, almost boring. It happens through consistency, not intensity. You don't need to rebuild your life overnight. You just need enough movement to keep it from shrinking. Enough connection to remind your system that safety can exist beyond your four walls. Balance isn't about changing who you are. It's about giving who you are more room to live. Here's the permission most people never receive. You don't have to choose between solitude and life. You don't have to abandon your love for quiet in order to move forward. And you don't have to become louder, busier, or more visible to be whole. Solitude was never the problem. It gave you depth. It helped you listen to yourself. It protected you when things felt like too much. That mattered. But solitude was never meant to be the only place you lived. You're allowed to rest and re-enter. To have a home that grounds you and a world that slowly opens again. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to remind your nervous system that safety doesn't end at your front door. You can carry quiet with you, into conversations, into movement, into small moments of connection that don't cost more than they give. If this video put words to something you've been carrying silently, you're not alone. Many people live this pattern without ever naming it. This channel exists to explore those quiet inner shifts without judgment, without pressure. If you want to continue these conversations, consider subscribing to the channel. And if any part of this resonated, leave a comment and share which part of the quiet you recognized in yourself. I'll be there reading.